Jaune's words caught her attention, enough so to drag it away from the beautiful woman who swished away from them. Even the way she carried herself was alluring. It felt intentional, manufactured, fake. She was used to people putting on airs, to people who carried themselves with diplomatic grace, as opposed to genuine kindness. I never said you'd do anything with her. I have eyes, Jaune. Well, it's just that you seemed awfully have the two of you met before? Was he being serious? She looked at him for a few seconds, and then groaned when she realized that he really was. Jaune. Of course I've met her before. She nearly roasted me alive. She sent you to the hospital. Oh, right. He blinked, and to her annoyance, looked genuinely surprised. I'd honestly forgotten about that. Yeah, well, I didn't. She didn't forget, and she didn't forgive either. She forgave even less, when the same woman that approached him with the kind of fake facade of someone after something. What does she want with him? Was she trying to seduce him? No, don't be foolish. Even if she was, that's none of your business, Weiss. He doesn't belong to you. I just think something's off about her. She looked away awkwardly when he shot her a sharp look. I'm not saying anything bad, I get a strange feeling around her. Yeah, jealousy. Her mind unhelpfully supplied. Maybe it's just lingering resentment over the whole training accident thing. Yeah, maybe. Jaune shrugged. Well, it's not like I was eager to have that conversation anyway. You helped me out. She had. A part of her would have thought he'd have wanted such a woman's attention. He always did before. No, he hasn't slept around in a while. Not since I confessed to him. Her eyes fell to the arm about her waist, and then the hand that rested atop of it. It felt warm and firm on her stomach. But more importantly, it felt like it belonged. There was no awkwardness there, despite it being alien for anyone to touch her so informally. It felt good. She liked it. She liked the sense of possession it suggested, even if the thought would have normally angered her. She was Weiss. No one could possess her, and yet, she couldn't help but feel there would be no complaints if he claimed it. Not that I wouldn't mind saying the same about him. She groaned. Winter was right. She really hadn't gotten over him. He said no, and like some kind of insistent stalker, she wanted to keep pushing. No doesn't mean forever, right? He only said no at that moment. What if I changed his mind? Didn't most people go through that normally? She seemed to recall her mother explaining how she initially turned down her father. Okay, maybe that was a bad example, but still, the point remained. In fact, she was fairly sure Jaune had mentioned his father being rejected numerous times by his mother. Compared to her family, Jaune's was loving too. It was proof. She wanted to cheer, but settled for blinking away her fantasies as she realized Jaune was trying to get her attention. Weiss, hello? You there? Huh? What? I asked you a question. A slow smile spread across his face. Lost in thought? Yes, and there was no chance in hell she was going to tell him what of. Sorry, what were you asking? On the train, back to Mountain Glen. You saw me when I was not thinking straight, right? She did. She hated to even think back on it, and sighing at him bringing it up. I saw, she said. Whatever happened though, it wasn't your fault. I told you before. You barely hurt me. I'm not made of glass, Jaune. I know. His hand rubbed her stomach and she felt herself melt against him. He smiled. I wasn't going to ask that. I promise. I just wanted to know if you saw me fight against any of the White Fang. We saw the results, but not any actual combat. When we found you, It looked like you'd already been engaged with Torchwick for several minutes. She frowned. Why do you ask? Is there something you wanted to know? He paused for a moment, almost as though caught. She wondered if he would answer the question at all, but after a few seconds of thought, he nodded. I wanted to know how I thought when I could barely think. I know some things can be instinctual, but I'm just a little surprised I could get that far in that state. I should have been throwing up, not kicking ass. Most of the White Fang didn't seem very well trained. Blake thinks it might have been intended as a suicide mission from the start. It's not. Jaune sighed. The people you found. Did it look like there were signs of combat? Did it look like a fight took place? Or like I snuck up and took them out before they knew it? Weiss leaned back, a little surprised. Surprised or maybe even a little concerned at the question. He looked serious though, so she did her best to remember. It wasn't hard. Some of those carriages had been covered in more blood than any one man could contain. She could still recall the frozen terror on their faces. Definitely combat, she said. Jaune, some of those faunus were impaled on their own weapons. Why all these questions? I'm just trying to piece it together. Isn't it normal to not like a big hole in your memories? Yeah, but you never cared before. Why this sudden change? Weiss opened her mouth to ask, but was cut off by an ear-piercing whistle. She winced, along with Jaune. Hey, mini princess. It's your turn. Crow grinned from his position next to an exhausted Yang and Blake, sprawled flat on their back. Quit cuddling with your boyfriend and get over here. Uncle Crow! Yang punched his side. Why did you have to interrupt? I'm sorry, what? I couldn't hear you over the sound of you losing 3-on-1 against me. Ugh, you're such a child. I think you missed an adjective there, Yang. I'm a victorious child. Anyway, get over here. Your sister will have my balls if you get pregnant on my watch. Weiss's cheeks felt like they might catch on fire. She glanced at Jaune, in time to see him cough awkwardly and remove his hand from her stomach. She didn't think she ever hated someone as much as she did Crow Branwen at that point. Go break a leg? Jaune laughed. Oh, she'd do more than just break it. What was that about? I didn't even realize we were so close. He sighed and lifted up his hand. He could still feel her beneath his fingertips. Don't fall for her, Jaune. You know you can. You know it would be too easy. You know how it will end. His hand wiped against the grass to get rid of the sensation. His eyes traced Weiss as she appeared before Yang, as the two nodded, and as Crow lifted Blake away. He didn't watch the fight, however. It wasn't important. So, he fought the White Fang normally, had he? He hadn't considered it before, or rather the implications of it. It was a single huntsman against a horde of untrained civilians. That was never a good option for the civilians, and even less so in an enclosed space where only 2 or 3 could attack at once. Even out of his mind, he would have still been strong enough. But there was one thing that bothered him still. He looked to his other hand and opened it. On his palm were several small indentations, where his nails had dug into his skin when Cinder first appeared. It stung briefly, but it was the slow drip of crimson fluid that he focused on. His aura should have prevented that. It hadn't, which meant it was still not working as it ought to. If that were true, however, then he'd have surely died on that train. The White Fang had guns on their side, and only a huntsman's aura protected them against those. That meant his aura worked. It protected him, shielded him. But if so, then why was it not doing so now? Where had it gone? Blake took a deep breath and tried to calm her frayed nerves. She filtered from one shadow to the next, ever onwards towards the elevator that led to the headmaster's office. He was in a meeting with other members of staff. She made sure to check that. Her team was busy too, it being several hours since their training session. Jaune was asleep, Weiss watching him, and Yang was with her sister. Now was the perfect time. Not was the worst time. This is madness, her mind warned. It wasn't anything hadn't been saying for the past few hours. He was the headmaster of Beacon, a powerful huntsman with decades of experience. If he caught her, she would be in trouble. That was, if he caught her, of course. She was no stranger to placing great risk on her ability to infiltrate a dangerous location. It was what she'd been doing for the White Fang for several years. And SDC encampments could just be as dangerous, if not more. At least Osmond didn't have any robots that could detect heat signatures on hand. He wasn't a paranoid Atlesian officer, nor an SDC executive with millions to spend on security. He was just a teacher. Even if he was powerful, his office was still just that of a teacher. So long as he was absent, the risk ought to be low, and the rewards might very well be worth it. She thought as she slipped into the elevator once she made sure no one was looking. It whirled near silently upwards. Yang is relying on me for this. Jaune is too, though he doesn't realize it yet. The door swished open. Headmaster Osborne? Blake called. She waited, just to see if he was present. If he were, she could claim she'd come for some other reason and excuse herself once he answered. Fortunately, it seemed he was still at the meeting. She paused for another few seconds, then walked cautiously into the room. It was empty. She was in. This feels too easy, she thought. One of her hands reached down to her hip, but her weapon was still in her locker. She rolled her eyes for even thinking about it, and then for her paranoia as well. Of course it was easy. This was just his school office. It wasn't like he had his personal fortune stored under his desk. Once she was sure she wouldn't be interrupted, Blake crept across the office and settled down onto his seat. It was comfortable, very comfortable, but a little too large for her. The tall back reared up above her, and she felt like a child in an adult's seat. Shaking her head, she pulled herself into the desk and ran her fingers across it, looking for the access button to his terminal. It was underneath, a common place to hide it, because it's a normal desk, she reminded herself. The varnished wood slid aside, a keyboard rising up from it, even as a screen flickered into life before her eyes. Perfect. Her fingers darted across the keys, eyes focused on the various folders and documents he had across his desktop. Most of them she ignored, but it was the student registry she wanted, assuming he had access to it. He did, luckily. She ducked into it and ran through the letters, searching for Jean Arc. She let out a bated breath as she found his file. I've done it, she thought. She licked her lips and opened it. Password required. Damn it, she hissed. It did almost feel too good to be true. Why would he leave his terminal unlocked, but have a password for individual folders? She groaned. How would he remember that many passwords? I've been told I have a good memory. Blake roared back in panic. A hand against the back of her seat prevented her from jumping out, however. She glanced behind her to see a green suit, then trailed her eyes up to meet those of the headmaster. Good evening, Miss Belladonna. He smiled. I wasn't aware you were coming to pay me a visit. Her heart fell. She should run. Should she try to escape? It was her immediate thought, but this wasn't some SDC security officer. He knew her name, where she slept and had influence over her. He could end her tenure in Beacon as easily as he could have arrested her. How? She whispered. How did I know? Osmond chuckled and stepped around the desk. To her embarrassment, he took one of the simple wooden seats and left her in his one. The comparison didn't do anything to change their roles, however. When you entered my office, you set off a silent alarm. He said, normally, it's to alert me to anyone who has come for an appointment, but since I was in a meeting with my colleagues at the time, I decided to come and see who it was. He lowered his glasses to look at her. Imagine my surprise when I see a particular student perusing my files. That explained how he knew, but not how she failed to detect his entry. Her eyes darted to the elevator, but he caught her. I have an alternate entry, should I need it. His smile said he wouldn't be informing her of it. Of course. It is not I who should be answering questions, don't you think? Blake shrunk in on herself. She didn't speak. There wasn't any point, really. No amount of excuses would get her out of this, nor would anything else she might say. If Osmond was upset with her stubborn defiance, he didn't show it. If anything, he looked amused. You have broken the rules in entering the office of a teacher without permission, he said. But because you were unable to access that folder, you did not break any laws. You have nothing to fear but detention with Miss Goodwitch. He smiled and took a sip of his coffee. Then again, perhaps that is reason enough to fear. She looked up in shock. She wasn't going to be expelled. Osmond seemed to understand her concern easily enough. Far be it for me to deprive our people of a potential huntress. In terms of legality, your actions are ill thought out and deserving of punishment. But surely no more so than actions of others. Mr. Ark, for instance, assaulted several peers when he was under the influence of drugs. Technically speaking, he should have been expelled for that. Anger surged to life within her. Her head snapped up to look directly into the headmaster's eyes. He didn't have any control of his actions, she said. You can't hold him responsible for what happened. Ah, no reaction. He chuckled when she ducked her head and cursed. Fear not. Mr. Ark suffered no punishment for his actions and won't. It was merely an example. Breaking into my office was foolish, accessing my terminal even more so. But you have not yet acquired anything for which I would feel a need to punish you unduly. You will serve a detention, and I trust this will not happen again. It won't, sir. Blake ducked her head, more than aware of how kind he was being. He had every right to do worse to her. Thank you. And I'm sorry. If you forgive my frank nature, you do not look very sorry. Blake's head snapped up. I am. I didn't mean to get caught. Osmond laughed when her cheeks flushed. Miss Belladonna, while we have not had much reason to interact personally, I believe I know enough of your past to say you are a young woman not unused to making difficult decisions. As such, I believe you are sorry that you were caught and didn't intend to be, but that you are not at all sorry for attempting this in the first place. He paused to watch her. Is that right, Miss Belladonna? She didn't answer. How could she? He was pretty much spot on. If I only knew the password, I could have gotten in. I could have found what I needed. I thought as much, he said. We all have our reasons for the decisions we make, and I dare say if someone can apologize so often after making their choice, then it was ill thought out to begin with. Tell me, my dear, what is it you wish to find? She didn't have to tell him. She knew that. He'd as good as said she would only get the detention, so she could have shrugged and let it go. But a part of her was desperate. I've already come this far. I've already tried and failed. I can't afford to keep failing. She looked up into his eyes. I wanted to find out why he recruited Jaune into Beacon. She wouldn't mention Sun or Yang, and there was no reason to bring them into it. Recruited? Osmond asked. Whatever do you... I know he didn't want to attend. I know you had something to do with Yang and how it led to Jaune being taken as well. Well, it seems Mrs. Oolong has shared that story with you. Osmond leaned back, but didn't seem too upset by the line of questioning. I did push the issue on Mr. Ark, I shall admit. Why? Potential, I suppose. In truth, I was more interested in your partner, as much as he may not believe it. A decision was necessary to ensure Miss Oolong didn't suffer for her crimes. That place was part of the criminal underground, Blake said. She'd seen as much when they went down there, and Yang told her. Why arrest and charge her for something like that? Because when she was arrested, they had committed no crimes. Osmond sighed. Had they attacked her, I might have been able to claim it as self-defense, but the two of them incapacitated all who attempted to stop them. I was left with a situation where the only one to blame for the whole debacle was a prospective student of mine. I did not wish to lose Miss Xiaolong. Mr. Ark came as a bonus, but that was all. That was it. It wasn't what she hoped for, nor anything that could help her or Yang in figuring out what was going on. The disappointment must have shown on her face, for Osmond sighed. I take it that was not the answer you wished for. He asked. It wasn't. No. She wanted something about him being involved with the White Fang in the past, or being a victim of an attack. She hoped for something obvious, a story they could understand, that they could use to figure out why they did things and use to help him. Osmond sighed. Miss Belladonna, why don't you tell me what it is you wish to achieve? If it bothers you, I shall not share the information, nor will I consider any additional punishment above what you have already received. She bit her lip and tried to keep the words in. He was good. She would admit. He managed to sound just supportive enough, just kind enough. She wanted to trust him. Years dealing with racism warned her against that, however, but she was desperate. She needed something, and he was the only person left that she felt might have the answers. She told him everything, bar who else was involved in her scheme. He didn't interrupt, even if his eyebrows rose once or twice. He would always adapt a calm face a moment after, sipping his coffee as she explained. When she was done, he sighed. I see. I cannot fault your desire to help a teammate, Miss Belladonna, but your execution could perhaps use some work. Might I ask why you do not simply ask Mr. Ark? He would never tell me. She scoffed. He's too good a liar. Or maybe just too good at distracting us whenever he doesn't want to talk about something. He always does it, even if it's something little or unimportant. Blake blew out some air from her nose. Her eyes narrowed as she bit back a growl. Jaune could be so irresponsibly irritating. Sometimes it feels like he has a million secrets he won't share with us. All men have secrets, my dear. Some are not for sharing. Well, maybe they should be when they start nearly getting you killed. I know about secrets. I have my own. But the moment they come back to try and hurt my team, I told them all about it. Jaune, it feels like he runs into danger all the time and yet we still don't know why. I must admit to some surprise, Osmond said. I was not aware any secrets had endangered any of your team as of yet. He had a point, but missed out on the rather obvious factor. Blake scowled and glared at him. Jaune is part of our team. If he gets hurt, then it affects the team. It's just so frustrating to know he's hurting himself, and he won't ask for help. You sound angry. I am, she agreed. He has no respect for his safety, yet he treats us like glass. We're expected to sit on the sidelines and stay safe as he runs around risking his own life. I'm not made of glass, and I'm not going to shatter if a Grim hits me. None of us are. She sighed and rubbed one hand down her face. I feel like we will shatter if he dies. Of course, getting him to realize that is just about impossible. Osmond chuckled to himself. It's not unusual for those to care about others to prioritize their safety, he said. It's also not unusual for some to forget that others might wish the same in return. Some of us spend so much time believing we are the only ones who can do something, that we forget the world does not revolve around us. Exactly. That was exactly it. Jaune acted like he was the only one who could deal with Mountain Glen, like he had to save her at the docks. Even when she and the others went out to the warehouses and did absolutely fine, he got angry because they went without him. He was angry because he felt they'd be dead if he wasn't there to hold their hand every step of the way. Blake sighed. She felt emotionally exhausted. I just want him to treat us like equals. She said, I'm not asking him to change or do things differently. You just want him to ask for your help. Osmond finished. Blake's eyes widened. Yes, I just want him to work with us, to let us help him like he's helped us. He can't keep doing this. Sooner or later, he's going to burn out. Blake's rant finished as suddenly as it began. It wasn't until she heard the headmaster's soft laughter that she realized all the things she said. He tricked me, she realized. He used my emotions against me. I've never been so angry before. I've never given so much away. She clenched her eyes shut and cursed herself for a million different kinds of a fool. She'd gotten sloppy. Jaune always seemed to make her mess up like that. An interesting reason, I will admit. The headmaster rose to his feet and finished the last of his coffee. I suppose at the very least, it confirms my decision not to punish you further. While misguided, your intent was not to cause harm or damage Beacon in any way. I wouldn't do that, she said. I believe you, Miss Belladonna. In fact, I find myself quite impressed to see you now, compared to the young woman I once met. I do believe you made motion of how people would not accept you, or how you were not a beacon to make friends. She glowered and looked away, but there was no denying what they both knew. She just ranted about her friend, after all. Well, I must go collect the form to fill out for your detention, he went on. Will you wait here while I fetch it? I shall only be 10 minutes or so. Confusion settled on Blake's shoulders. Wait in his office? Why? She looked up to him, but the headmaster wore an enigmatic smile. Blake nodded. It took her a second to realize she was still in his seat, and that it made it look as though they were the errant student. The analogy made her cheeks darken, if only because of how stupid it was. Yes, sir. I'll wait. Very good. Osmond strolled towards the elevator door, but then paused. Your teammate, he said. Mr. Ark. He is quite the wild card, is he not? Huh? She looked at the headmaster. Think on it, he said. I will only be 10 minutes, Miss Belladonna. The door swished open and shut behind him. Blake stared at it, unsure why exactly he hadn't made her follow or even delayed it until tomorrow. It wasn't like she was going to leave Beacon in the middle of the night. Her eyes trailed down to her hands, still before the keyboard sat into the desk. Her eyes widened. Could he? No, surely not. But what if it was so? She swallowed and brought up the screen once more. It hadn't moved, but she didn't have much time. She brought up the same folder as last time and attempted to open Jaune's. It prompted her for a password as it had before, but this time she had one to enter. Wildcard. It opened. She couldn't finish. She swallowed and ignored it. 10 minutes, she whispered. I need to be quick. She flicked through it as best she could. There were his grades, which she ignored, along with information on his family. She didn't want to intrude on his privacy, which felt a weak justification for what she was already doing. But this wasn't for her curiosity. Instead, she found a folder labeled Criminal Record and delved into it. Surely, it would contain information about the crime Osmond had apparently pinned on him, the reason why he'd been recruited. It did. But the file didn't offer much in the way of answers. It's like Osmond said. The only charge is for disorder and criminal damage, and it even mentions Yang by name. He told the truth then. He really did force Jaune here just to ensure Yang's place. But there was mention of a tracker, which was worth a raised eyebrow, but she ignored it. If Jaune wore one, he kept it hidden, and probably for good reason. She wouldn't intrude. Another folder caught her eye as she left the first one labeled Movements. She opened it, curious as to what it might mean. The folder was filled with images, each one labeled with a date and time at the bottom. There were hundreds, if not thousands, and Blake let out a long sigh as she looked at them all. There was no chance she had time to shift through all of those. Why did Osmond even have maps? She opened one and recognized it as Vale easily enough. There was a marker too, along with a dotted line. This must be the tracker. I guess these were taken automatically and uploaded to Osmond's terminal. It's not like he would have had the time to label each date and file. She was about to leave, but a subfolder caught her attention. It was labeled with one word. Interesting. Well, let's see what's so interesting, shall we? Of interest were apparently several maps, far fewer in number and dated more than a few days apart. They were no different from the others. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at the dates. Each seemed to come in a pair of 2 days, one with being the 13th and 14th of the month, and then another pair of being the 20th and 21st. Jaune was in Vale, she whispered. Her eyes tracked his dot and the line he'd left behind. Apparently, it was a map which showed his movements over the course of a single hour. She checked the time at the bottom, and then read back. 1:30 in the morning? Why would he be out at that time in Vale? She closed it down and opened another. This one was much the same, about a bit before midnight, but still on a weekday. Jaune's tracker suggested he left Beacon and gone into the city. But that couldn't be right. This is silly. It even claims he went into the ocean at one point. But unless he's got a secret life as a skinny dipper, I doubt he'd bother with that. If he wanted to swim, Beacon actually had a pool, not to mention the water's edge down the cliff. He didn't need to go all the way into the city, and certainly not to go swimming in the sludge off in the industrial district. Wait. The industrial district? Wasn't that where the two of them have gone looking for the White Fang's warehouses? Blake pulled out the image and inspected the dates once more. Damn it. She couldn't remember the exact dates when they'd gone out. She'd been too busy at the time, and it wasn't like she kept a detailed diary of her vigilante activities. The month fits though. The second image always seems to have limited movement too. Jaune comes into Vale, but just kind of sits in one spot for an hour before returning. Could that be the times when she went with him? There was no tracker for her, of course, but she could easily imagine herself crouched by his side. The maps certainly seemed to match up, even if the detail wasn't that good. If anything, the fact he'd been out those days as good as proved it. But why would he have come the day before as well? I did tell him about the places I wanted us to check out, but what would be the point going there on his own? The answer hit her like one of Yang's punches. It had much the same effect too, rattling her so hard that she fell back in Osmond's seat. No, surely not. Would he have really gone that far, just to prevent her fighting the White Fang? What a stupid question. Of course he would. Blake heard the elevator weir and closed the terminal once more. Her hands shook as she did, her mouth unusually dry. When the headmaster entered, she doubted he could possibly miss how shaken she was. He didn't once comment on it. He gave her a detention slip, warned her against breaking into his office, and sent her away. Yang had to know.